staying with the coronavirus, the Inter-ministerial Committee for the Evacuation and Quarantine of South Africans under lockdown in China's Wuhan has confirmed the urgent return of 151 people in that city. Health Minister leading this committee has outlined the current situation of the deadly coronavirus as it affects South Africans and how government will be responding from now on. For what came out of that briefing, I'm joined now by ENCA's Barry Bateman at OR Tambo Airport in Kempton Park, and he attended that briefing. Barry, can you tell us about the tone of that briefing? Certainly worldwide concern at the moment. I wouldn't quite say panic just yet, but a lot of people across the globe very worried about the spread of this virus. What was the tone at the briefing today at OR Tambo?
Well, I think we're getting a sense of determination coming from this ministerial committee being led by Minister Mkhize, and also trying to allay fears. They're trying to put confidence in the public that this government has got everything under control and is putting in place all the required mechanisms to firstly, A, identify should the virus land on our shores, and should that happen, that they would have all the facilities and the resources available to be able to deal with it. But dealing with this immediate mission, if we can call it that, to repatriate the South Africans, I think it's being underlined that this is a military operation. The South African Medical Health Services will be the supporting logistics for the various departments involved. So I think perhaps that kind of precision is what's coming through in the manner in which Mkhize referred to this matter, but certainly confident, making it clear that within the next 7 to 10 days this operation will be underway, and they hope to have those South Africans, 151 of them, back in South Africa to start the quarantine process.
And certainly that determination and a very disciplined process and action plan will allay the fears of many of South Africans, especially those currently in China. Can you give us a little bit more detail about that action plan?
Well, the action plan is essentially in two parts. The first part being the evacuation itself, the second, the quarantine. The first part, and as I said, the military or the defence force is going to be providing the logistics to support this. But the first part is essentially being conducted by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. And that is the repatriation, the evacuation. It starts in China. There will, of course, be a pre-flight screening to ensure that all the people boarding that plane are not infected with the COVID-19 virus. Anybody who is found to be positive for the virus will be referred to the Chinese health authorities to deal with. Once they are on the aeroplane or the process leading up to getting onto the aircraft back to South Africa, there will be strict quarantine protocols in place. The manner in which all the people are going to be travelling, we assume that there will be the masks on the individuals, there will be the highest standards of health. And I must point out as well, all the people taking part in this, from the various departments and the military health services, they themselves will be subject to those same quarantine protocols. Moving to the second part, when the aircraft arrives in South Africa, we're not being told where this aircraft is going to be arriving or where the quarantine site is. We're told that 81 sites were investigated. One has been chosen that is going to be used. There again will be strict quarantine protocols. There will be a no man's land, as it's being referred to ensure that there's no direct contact between the people in quarantine and those people outside of the quarantine, such as when deliveries of food and other supplies need to be made, there will actually be no contact between the individuals. The minister warning that any person who breaks the quarantine protocols would be subject to prosecution legally. So taking this very seriously to ensure the safety of the people in the quarantine, but of course to ensure that this repatriation does not result in the introduction of this virus to the South African public. But making the point as well was Mkhize that the people being brought back to South Africa, and this is to allay the fears of the general public, the people being brought back are healthy individuals. This is not about importing the virus into South Africa. These are healthy people that are being brought back to their home country with the support of their government. And the quarantine period is a protective measure to ensure that those that are brought home who might have been infected within the period, the 14-day period that it's able to, they can show symptoms, that they are ruled out before they are allowed to go back to their families and enter the general population.
Barry, I want to ask you specifically about the focus on location of this repatriation or evacuation operation. We were just speaking to a South African student based in Xiangyang, which is about 325 kilometers north of Wuhan, and he was expressing concern that about 60 people that he knows of in that city with him, South African citizens, are not being brought back. They have the same problems that South African citizens are facing in Wuhan. Limited access to food, restricted movements, and he's saying that they have been appealing to the South African embassy and have not gotten any conclusive answers. Was that topic touched on in today's briefing?
Well, it certainly was. Minister Mkhize saying that the focus of this repatriation effort will be in Wuhan, as you've indicated. But he also spoke about neighboring towns or cities all within the Hubei province, which has been the hardest hit area. Now, the city that you just referred to, Xiangyang, is in the Hubei province. I asked the question whether these people would qualify for repatriation. According to the minister, they certainly would. But he says the difficulty that government is facing is that they're not aware of all South Africans who are in the country. That is a little bit difficult to believe. We have seen correspondence from families just sent yesterday to the presidency saying we have got people, relatives in that city that we're referring to, and they have not been identified for repatriation. So the message coming from the government is please get hold of the Department of International Relations. A hotline has been set up. We just heard now in this briefing that just in the duration of this press conference that calls were coming in to identify people in the country. But outside of Hubei, there is no plan at this stage to repatriate any South Africans. The minister saying that there appears to be limited spread of the COVID-19 in those areas outside of the Hubei province. Therefore, there is no need for the repatriation to take place, nor is there any repatriation taking place in other countries which have been affected by this virus.
Thank you very much for that, Barry Bate.